my survivor sisters. When I learned about that was when I started getting really emotional. I have a 8-year-old boy. When the files were released earlier this year, and I learned of the darkness and depravity of the files, I couldn't even speak anymore. And I don't know how many of you know or have read the files. It is dark. It took on a whole new meaning for me and my survivor sisters in this fight, because we started to realize we probably weren't going to get justice. And so we shifted our focus into just educating and just bringing awareness and then outing these predators. So I want to walk you through how I came to understand how I was trafficked. Because let me tell you, it was a shock to me. On August 7th, 2019, I was sitting on my couch. I had just fallen in love, basically for the first time, thinking I was in a safe relationship. I was sitting on the couch across from my boyfriend. He had a son, I had 3 sons, we blended our families. And I was in Southern California, where I promised my kids when we lived in New York City that one day I was going to move them to the ocean and have an ocean view. And so I thought, life is good. And so I was on my phone, because I didn't pay attention to the news, that's what my boyfriend did. And I heard Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in prison. And I looked up at the TV as they showed the jail cell. And I was just started hyperventilating, and I just got so upset. This is a name, obviously I knew very well from back in the early 2000s, but I hadn't thought about him. I had ignored all the news for many, many years. But something in me said, Lisa, what's going on here? Something in my body said something wasn't right, and I ran to my bedroom. And I just went on my bed and started crying, like, what is going on here? Why did I feel like it's almost like my father had died? And then I had like this anger come over me. And then I also had this weight lifted off of me for the first time, where I felt like, wait a second, I'm so confused of how I'm feeling right now with this man being dead. But I felt like free for the first time. So, over the next few days, I was like, let me research this and start to understand a little bit more about what's going on with Jeffrey Epstein and the survivors that were out there that were advocating. There weren't that many in 2019, but there was one beautiful, brave one, and her name is Virginia Dufresne. Virginia and her story that made me think about my story. And I reached out to the first survivor sister, Miranda Chartouni. She's from Seattle. She became, a good support system to me. Because my boyfriend at the time didn't hold space for me. I didn't have support. When I went to him to tell him, look, I want to talk to you about Jeffrey Epstein, what happened to me, he put his hand right in my face and said, I don't want to hear it. I just realized at that moment, this is probably not my person. Probably not going to help me this way. Reach out to family and friends, and not many people that hold space for me. And so one thing you're going to realize if you're a survivor out there who's never spoken out, that you need support. And it's going to be hard to find the right support around you. So I started reaching out to my survivor sisters. But I also wanted answers. And when I spoke to Virginia Dufresne, I said, darling, the reason why I'm reaching out to you is because I think I saw you on the island when I was there. UK, but not here. And I talked to her about another person that she spoke out about. And I said, I met him too. And so, from that moment, I started to realize I need to do some work here. So I started going to therapy, and I started really owning my story, and figuring out what the heck happened to me in the early 2000s. When I was a young model, so full of hope and dreams and ambition. It was just a beautiful time. Leaving high school, I graduated high school in Belgium. My father worked for NATO. I had traveled all around the world as a child. I lived in Oxford, England. I lived in the States, and then went back in my teen years and graduated high school in Belgium. My parents moved to Germany after. My sister still lives in Germany. And I was a fashion model. And back then, you had to be a certain height and a certain size, and you felt kind of special to be a fashion model back then. And we all kind of looked up to models in the 90s, right? Traveled around in Europe, worked my way up, moved to Miami Beach, like in the heyday, Miami Beach. Started doing tons of TV commercials and being successful. I had a small part in movies and things like that. I was just living my dream. And I finally got signed to a big model agency in New York City, and I moved to New York in 1999. And this is kind of where my story shifts. Just one job I did. One amazing job. It was for a British magazine. It was 5 pages of an editorial where we were shooting in Tortola in the British West Indies. So with the crew and one other model, she was Eastern European, who traveled from New York to Tortola. And we spent a few days photo shooting, and it was great. This is something people always dream of doing. And I felt happy. Then we had a day off. And the other young girl says to me, well, I know a guy who owns an island really close by. He's like a mentor to me. He helped me get a visa to work in the U.S. She was from Poland. He helped her to get a visa to work in the U.S. So she's like, I think we should go. So I'm like, okay, we're fun. So the clients actually let us go. So just thinking we were going to go over there for a few hours and then be back by 5 o'clock. So we're sent this boat. We get on the boat. We go across the sea, not very far, to Little St. James. There, we jump in frolic on outdoor trampoline in the ocean, and we go play in the pool. And in the pool, I observed an older man who's frolicking in the pool, canoodling and kissing this younger blonde girl. I'm like, okay, well, I'm modeling business, and you see older men and younger girls. It's not too different from what I've seen in New York City around that time. And so I didn't really think anything of it. And then we had like a lunch, dinner type of thing, where we sat at the table, and that's where I met Jeffrey Epstein. And he walked in. And the girls were all, treating him like he's a good guy, kind of a mentor thing. Almost father-daughter. It wasn't, he's not a playboy, Someone who sat with you and asked about your dreams and ambitions and your goals, and he locked right in on me. It's like, where are you from? Where'd you grow up? And I said, well, the first few years of my life I lived in Oxford, England. And he's like, wow, Oxford, really? So, he said, well, tell me a little bit about yourself. And, I told him how I traveled around, and, I liked art and, modeling, and it's like, what are your goals? What do you want to do with your life? He said, well, my goals to be a board model. I'm working towards that. I want to, act in movies, and, I'm going to go to school for drama school, stuff like that. The interest kept flowing and flowing, and I just loved it. I never had a guy pay that much attention to me, and it felt good. It did. And he was charming, and he was nice, and the girls around me made it seem like it was safe and everything was fine. So that was in the folder earlier. And he said his name was Prince Andrew. And then he walked away. And then Jeffrey tells me, well, guess what? The ocean's pretty rapid right now. And it's getting dark. You're not going to be able to go hiking the island. You're going to stay here tonight. And so, yeah. Okay. So we went to the quarters where we were supposed to stay. And I was just hanging out there with the other girl probably there. And then another girl came to the door that was there from earlier, and she knocked on the door. She was like, Jen is ready for his massage. And so I looked at the other girl, and I was like, what massage? She's like, well, I didn't know he was going to do this, but Jeffrey likes massages. And I was like, I'm not getting a massage. She was like, well, we have to do it. And I was like, well, you're going to do it. And she's like, no, if he says we have to do it, we have to do it. And so I looked at the other girl, and I was like, you know, I'm not going to do it. And she's like, oh, well, you have to do it. So the other girl said, look, just follow me. And so I was like, okay. So I'm going to massage. I guess I get a massage. So we walk across the island over to where Jeffrey Epstein's bedroom is, and he's lying naked on the massage table. And we walk in, and he's, you know, cheesy little grin, and, you know, starts talking about, oh, you know, more flirty type stuff, like, I'm your boyfriend, and, you know, this and that, and I'm going to teach you real massage techniques. And he actually did teach me real massage techniques. I actually learned how to give a massage. Strangely. But that's how Jeffrey Epstein abuses. That's how he used every single one of his victims. It always starts with massage. And then the massage turns very dark when he flips over. And all of a sudden, game over. And I'm only emotional about this because I know. Because now I know. Back then, he assaulted myself and the other girl, and we ran out of there after it was done. We went to the room, and we stayed up all night just staring at the ceiling, waiting until we could leave on the boat. Come to find out, we were actually pretty lucky, because I've heard so many horror stories of what happened on that island. When we got off that island, we went back to our other island, finished up our shoot, and we went back to New York City. Now, this is where the story should have ended. And this is what I beat myself up over for so long. This was 2000. Epstein died in 2018. I always thought it was my fault for those 19 years. I always thought, why didn't I fight him off and like say no and run away and screw you and like, I don't know, say something. But I didn't, I just froze. And then I started thinking, oh, I must have fighted it. I must have been 30. I have a public personality, so it must have been my fault. But Jeffrey Epstein has secretaries. He has enablers and he has people that work for him. And for months, his secretaries called myself on my cell phone and my model agency every week until they were able to get me an appointment to go meet with him. That's what he wanted. He wanted me to go meet with him in this Upper East Side townhouse. I refused. This is probably the reason why he asked me so many good questions that made me feel so comfortable and cared about and seen on the island. Because one day he called me and he said to me, Lisa, I remember what you said on the island. Your big goal was to be a foreign model. And I said, yeah. And he was like, well, friend is Katie Ford. And I told her about you. She said that you could go meet with her. Well, that's how I got reeled back in. Because that's all I wanted. And I thought, wow, he cares about me. Maybe he didn't mean to abuse me on the island. Maybe it was all my fault. And he knows Katie Ford. How can I turn this down? And he owes me. Like, he owes me. So I'm gonna go. It was just a phone call, right? So I'm gonna go. And I did go. Got ready, and I went over to Green Street, Soho, beautiful Ford modeling agency, and knocked on that, but what not very dramatic. I went into the elevator and signed in, and walked right in to the office of Katie Ford. Do you guys know who Ford modeling agency was in the year 2000? It was big. I have been working for that goal since I was 16 years old, since my dad drove me all the way up to New York City and took me around the modeling agencies where no, Ford told me no. You know, Miami, Ford told me no. They told me no. So I was like, wow, this is the way to get in. And I met Katie Ford. And I showed her my book, all proud, I've been to South Africa, you know, I've been here, and all this stuff. And now she signed me up. And I became a Ford mom. And she said, oh, I love Jeffrey, he's amazing. Jeffrey's great. So I thought, okay, well, maybe he's not such a bad guy. So that was the end of that. I thought that was the end of that. Jeffrey knew that was the end of that. Because I had seen somebody on that island that we know today is very, very important. I think perhaps maybe I knew too much. Because I didn't think I was special. So, let's get back to human trafficking. Within the modeling industry, I started to find out through depositions, settlements, through models, young girls, everyone coming forward, that there was a connection between the modeling agents in New York City and in Paris and Europe were sending girls to this man. They were getting visas for Eastern European girls to work in New York. It was almost what you would call trafficking. So my lawyer said to me one day, look, Lisa, you were trafficked. And I was like, no, that's ridiculous. I didn't get thrown in a van. I didn't get shipped off to a foreign country. Like, what? Trafficking? No. I just didn't want to accept that I was trafficked. There was something about trafficking that felt like it just couldn't have been me. And so, I realized it was me. Because as we started to unravel this web and peel this really dirty onion, the Epstein survivors started to realize when we were sent to people, like for myself, flying to LA for a big movie director's audition, seems legit. 10 other girls were sent too. Other girls were sent, maybe they wanted to be in our world, sent to these people. You know? Others were sent here. We found out that universities were involved, NYU, Columbia, New School, were offering scholarships to these young girls. A way to lock them in. You're with the modeling agency, you're locked in. You're with the university, you're locked in. I get you a job, you're locked in. They were locking them all in. Getting you a visa to live in the United States, you're definitely locked in. What I'm doing is trying to explain to you abuse, so you can have a greater understanding for victims of that Epstein. And I'm just talking about the ones right now in New York City. We're not even talking about what happened in Zorro Ranch. I'm not even going to tell you what happened in Zorro Ranch. I don't even think I can get through it. But most of you do know about the sweetheart in Florida and the young girls in Florida that were 14, 15, and 16 years old. My survivor sisters that are brave, because they were young. And they were raped. And what Jeffrey Epstein made almost every girl do is introduce your friends to him. You couldn't get away. You could say, okay, I don't want to do that. Please don't touch me. We'll do that. Maybe we're going to be someone else. You have to introduce them to your friends. And there's so many of young girls that brought so many other young girls. The reason why I'm here today, when Karen reached out to me, we went back and forth for a little while. I wasn't always ready to talk about trafficking. There was just always something about it. But she let me know that there's trafficking going on right here in your community. You see it. You may not be aware of it. It's happening. And maybe not on this grander, bigger scale like Epstein, but it's the same kind of thing. Grooming and coercive control. It's the same thing whether you're a minor or you're over 18. What they do is they prey on you, they offer you opportunities. They offer you maybe a place to stay, maybe they tell you that, your parents don't really care about you, but I do. I can help you get into college or get a good job or there's so many things they can do, love bomb you and make you feel special. I want people to be aware of what's going on. I think the more educated that we all are, the easier it's going to be for our youth to say no, have boundaries, or more importantly, tell somebody as soon as it happens. Because what these predators, they rely on is that you're going to feel shame about what's going on. And it's a powerful, powerful emotion. It is very hard to move through shame. It took me so long. And when you see the tears coming, it's the shame popping up. And they also want you silenced. The whole Epstein ring was about silence. I was definitely silenced for many years. I would never speak out when reporters would call me back in the early 2000s and later 2000s. Never. The only way that I got coverage was after he died. Today I understand that trafficking isn't always about force. Sometimes it's about creating a system where saying no feels impossible. Sometimes it's about convincing someone they are lucky to be there. Sometimes it's about making exploitation look like an opportunity. That is why trafficking is happening right under our noses. That is why education matters. And that is why I had no idea that it happened to me. What I understand today is that Epstein wasn't just exploiting girls. He had built an entire ecosystem of enablers and pipelines. An ecosystem that used model agencies, social connections, scholarships to prestigious colleges, powerful introductions, and career opportunities. What makes trafficking so dangerous is that it doesn't always feel dangerous in the beginning. Sometimes it feels exciting. Wow, I have a job opportunity in Vegas? What, I get to do that? Until you show up there and it's not that. That's why people miss it. That's why also parents miss it. In 2024, after depositions, documentaries, survivor conversations, and learning more about the involvement of the fashion industry, I started understanding the bigger picture. Not like I do now. That was just 2024. Gosh, how much I've known since then. Every conversation felt like another layer of an onion being peeled back. And with every layer came another powerful realization. How much of my youth had been influenced by opportunities at all. How many introductions were actually transactions? How many young women had experienced the same thing? Hundreds. I wasn't just learning about Epstein. I was learning about my own life. And honestly, it made me very, very angry. So in 2024, I woke up one day. I just woke up and I was like, I've got to do something bigger than myself. At the time, I was working as a model agent still. I was in the modeling industry since I was 15 years old. So up to a couple of years ago, I was still in the modeling industry. And of course, it's changed so much, it wasn't even that inspiring anymore. And I was still hearing the same stories. I knew I had to do something bigger than myself. I needed to challenge myself. I needed to help. I didn't know then where that would lead. But it eventually led me right here in front of me. What I've learned is that survivors aren't outbeat. The survivors are the powerful ones. We all have survivor stories in us. The people who endure unimaginable things and still choose to keep going. There's so much strength in them. The people who refuse to let their past define their future. That's the place. That's where I am now. That's where I want survivors to get to. Where you're not a victim anymore. Where you're owning your story. Where you're healing through it by telling somebody. Whether it's your parent, a sibling, a best friend, a spouse, girlfriend, therapist, anybody. Start talking about it. Start sharing. I'm learning these realizations the same way you guys are. I started my podcast just because it was done in a week. I went and got the studio. I did it so fast because I couldn't talk myself out of it. But I knew I had to sit down with survivors and start listening to their stories. As I'm listening to their stories, I was telling my Epstein story. Every episode I would tell a little bit of my story because I still didn't have the guts to tell the story. So I would work into my story with the survivor story. That was my idea. It was really an idea, I thought, for my healing process and for others. Because as we sat there and told these stories, it wasn't just serial predators, what I kind of focused on because there were so many of them. Puff Daddy, Cosby. I interviewed a survivor who was abused by Cosby in 1970. Very Nassar. The gymnast, Olympic gymnast doctor. I found out that his abuse with all those gymnasts were the exact same type of abuse that's used to us. Digital. One of the most confusing. My podcast taught me so much, and it gave me strength. It gave me more strength to speak out. Because right after the podcast ended, guess what happened? Capitol Hill. And on Capitol Hill, that's when I started learning about not just the hundreds and hundreds of Epstein survivors out there, but I started learning about all the other survivors around the world. Because after that, thousands of people started reaching out to me, saying how proud they were, and how inspired they were. And actually, telling me about something that happened to them when they were growing up. And they hadn't told anybody in 30, 40, 50 years. That really touched me. I couldn't understand. I mean, it took me 15 or 20 years, so I kind of understand. But I was just like, how are people going through these most horrendous parts of their life and they haven't told a soul? I understand it because I also did it. If Epstein hadn't been such a big story, I don't think I would have ever told anybody. I would have been too much ashamed of it. Because I still would have thought I had something to do with it. But it wasn't my fault. Look who we know who Jeffrey Epstein is today. How was it my fault? And people still try to blame us if we're over 18. Half of us are over 18 that were abused. And they have no sympathy for the under 18, which of course you should. But it happens to you at any age. probably the most defining moment of my life. I did not expect to happen. First of all, I didn't know what was going to happen. We had Rokana, Massey. We had powerful politicians and representatives standing with us. We had our incredible attorneys that always been standing by us and fighting for us. We had survivor sisters that came from all over the U.S. and England to stand with us and speak out. And I had a really great speech prepared. I mean, obviously I didn't have as much time to tell the whole story, so without telling the whole story, it's hard to tell the story. But I had a really good speech prepared. And I was one of the last ones to go. And I remember getting so angry as I sat there and listened to each survivor story, because I hadn't heard every survivor story. In the news, all you hear is questions about what's happening in the news that day. You never get to hear the survivor story and how they were brought into the network. Each one of the survivor stories was exactly like my story. Different ages, different areas, and the same abuse, different segments of the same abuse. It was making me mad, especially when the girls were 14 or 15 years old. It was making me mad. So that's when I had that viral speech, where I stood up there, and I was like, you know what? You're not going to have power over me. You're not going to have power over me. I'm going to take my power back. That's what I said. So you think you know the names. Because a lot of us were abused by them. That's why I said that. I didn't think it was going to be as media story. And people really wanted to do up some names. I said confidentially, I want survivors to come forward so we can connect the dots, so we can get more powerful together. And that's what happened. When I said that speech, and my survivor sisters said their speeches, and we did so much press after that, it was an avalanche after that, because it hasn't stopped. We got our bill passed by the President of the United States. But he didn't release it on time. And he didn't release all the files. We didn't really get what we wanted. But the American people started to understand what was really going on. They started to understand who was protected and who wasn't. As the files started to be released, my survivor sisters, ones that were outspoken, and many that weren't, their names weren't redacted. They were put out there. Emails, their stories that they never told anybody. They never told anyone. They didn't tell their husband, they didn't tell their kids, they didn't tell their community, but now it was all out there. Why did they do that to them? And why did they not reveal the names of the people that were involved? Right. Yes. Why didn't they? So we thought this was going to be a one and done. This was going to be a much easier fight. It didn't turn out that way. Because Pambani didn't handle the files properly. We were at that Pambani hearing. That picture that went viral, I was right behind her like this. Because she couldn't even turn around and look at us. I can't even tell you how heartbreaking that was to her. But she couldn't even turn around and look at us. It was a defining moment again for myself and my survivor sisters. Wow, she's sending a clear message that we don't matter. None of us matter, because when we stood up there, 12 of us, we represented 1,400 of us. And she couldn't even blink just a little at us or say anything to us. That was the moment when we realized we were screwed. Because we heard all the representatives and they're fighting for us. They were yelling. And all she could talk about was the battle. Flipping through her notes looking for any insult. It was awful. They had these huge printouts. Massey even said, look, I've been trying to get this name redacted because it was a very important email. They would redact that name. And until we finally found out what the name was last semester. Why did they not release that name, but they released all the survivors' names? So it was a heartbreaking moment. We realized that most likely we're never going to see justice. But what we can do, we can out them, we can also reveal them in other ways. I mean, they have been revealed. The files are revealing everything. We can hold people accountable. We can have hearings. We can do everything that we can.
And we can vote.
No way. Yes. I would hope that you would see that the survivors do matter in this fight. And you can see who's protected. So, I left that family on a hearing I flew right to Ireland. Because I was invited to be on the Late Late Show. Because my story has a lot to do with the UK. Not only did I grow up half my life in Europe, but I knew things in the UK. Holds people accountable. The reporters are investigative reporters over there. They used to be. We're compliant over here. But over there, I decided that I would start campaigning in Ireland, in England, and in France, where they're hoping to get the files. Actually, 1,500 just dropped a couple days ago in Madison, in the UK. So it's starting. We're looking and pushing for a public inquiry, like your Starmer and Prime Minister. You know, we need answers over there. And as things start happening in Europe, hopefully we'll have.
We need answers here.
Yep, we'll get it.
Well, we hope so. We hope so. We hope so. The reason why I'm here today is because a lot of us have seen survivors were trafficked. We didn't just suffer abuse from Jeffrey Epstein. There were a lot of other people, and we know that. I'm hoping I affected you in some positive way today. At least to have sympathy and empathy for survivors, to understand the fight that we're on, to support us, to understand it wasn't our fault. No matter how bad I wanted to be the four-ball you need to see. You know, it wasn't my fault. You have a trafficking problem here, too. You do. Young girls and boys. It's not okay. This is not okay. As a community, we need to fight for these kids. Any way we can. You have a voice. There's advocacy groups. There's forums online. You can call into, your state representatives. So many representatives in Washington fought for us. We could have done this without them. So many want to, but they couldn't. I think we all can make a change. That decision in 2019 to start speaking out was the best decision I ever made in my life. Because I didn't have to. I could have just stayed silent. Not having a support system. Maybe if I had a support system. Maybe if I had a support system and a wonderful partner at that time, maybe I just would have confided in him. Because I had nobody. I went looking for people who cared. And that's why I continue this fight today. Because I'm always looking for people to care. And for those of you that don't understand, you don't have children or grandchildren, this generation is screwed. With Roblox, Instagram, they have a direct path, predators, to our kids. It's not good. I have 3 boys. not good, the world we live in right now. We got him, Chief.